Thank you, Abina, and welcome everybody. I went to Pakenham High. Did anyone go to Pakenham High here? It's a very exclusive school. It's probably not many people here that went to Pakenham High. I went to Pakenham High, and I finished up there in 1997, which gives you a sense of how old I am. I went to Monash University and studied commerce. I went to Monash University. I studied commerce, did a major in finance, and at the end of that, I had no idea what I wanted to do. Absolutely no idea. So if you're in that spot, like, that is okay. It is okay to not know what you want to do, with the next step, let alone the rest of your life and career. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I had watched a couple of really bad stockbroking movies, okay? And this sounds terrible, like Wall Street and Boiler Room, and it probably sets me up to be a criminal, but that's not what I wanted to become. But I saw this whole kind of financial markets thing, and I was completely entranced. I thought, that looks really interesting, I want to do that, right? Not rip people off, but work in financial markets and stockbroking. So we didn't have Google at the time. We had Yahoo. So I Yahooed, if that's even a thing. I Yahooed stockbroking Melbourne, and I literally sent my resume to every search result that came out, right? So I end up getting an interview at this place called JB Weir, okay? Now JB Weir, unbeknown to me, okay, the most prestigious and oldest investment bank in Australia, okay, 175 years old this year, and was at the time, up there with Macquarie as being the most prestigious place to work. I had no idea who JB Weir was, right? It wasn't until I got an interview there and someone said, "You got an interview at JB Weir?" And I'm like, "Is that a good thing?" And they're like, "Yeah, that's awesome." Did I figure out that I was onto something? I got a job in the call centre there. So I started at the absolute bottom of the whatever that is, rung, pile, whatever. And I worked there for 12 years. And I loved every single minute of that 12 years that I was there. I worked in 7 different jobs when I was there. I started in the call centre. I spent the first 6 years of my life just getting off that bottom rung. If you're going to be in junior roles, you have to kind of do your time. And then I got a chance to run a startup business in JB Weir, which went very well. They then let me run the whole of New South Wales, which was kind of scary. And then I came back as Chief Operating Officer for Australia and New Zealand, as in back to Melbourne. I was in New South Wales. And then my CEO resigned when I was Chief Operating Officer, and they made me the acting CEO. Okay, I'm 33 years old, and I was feeling pretty good about myself because I'm running a business with 500 people in it that manages $50 billion of Australia's wealth, that has 9 offices across Australia and New Zealand, and I was feeling very, very good about myself at that point in time. And as only the universe or God or whatever word you would like to ascribe to that all-knowing, all-powerful being can do, it decided that I was probably feeling a little bit too good about myself. Despite the fact that about 3 months into my acting CEO role, I thought I was a lock for that job, like I was hitting the ball out of the park. I thought I was absolutely nailing everything, and everybody around me was telling me I was nailing everything. I get about 5 or 6 months in, and I'm thinking, they haven't told me it's my job yet. Like, why would they have not have told me it's my job yet? And the realization dawned on me that I was not going to get that job. I was not going to be in what was then my dream job of CEO of JB Weir permanently. And it was devastating for me. Like, I cannot tell you how devastating that was. But it took me a little while. I picked myself up, I dust myself off, and I had this decision to make in my career. Like, what do I do from here? Because it's a really big decision. I don't feel that great about going back to my Chief Operating Officer job. It just doesn't, I don't think I can be that interested or passionate about that anymore. And so that was the first decision that I had to make. And I'll tell you how I made that decision. People talk about leaders being, has everyone heard of like you're a head, heart or gut leader? Has anyone heard of that terminology, right? I think to be a good leader, you've got to be able to tap into all 3 of those things. But I'm definitely, my bias is to my gut, okay? Like in decision making, I make a lot of decisions, probably too many of them, based on gut feel, Okay, so when I need to make a big decision, I often go and find people who are better, think more with their head, and people that think more with their heart. My dad is the head thinker in my world, and my mum is my heart thinker in my world. So I'm thinking, I think I've got to leave, my gut tells me I've got to leave. I'm at a barbecue at my brother's house, I go to my dad and I say, I'm thinking about leaving. And he says, you're an idiot. Why would you do that? You're 33 years old, you get paid like stacks of money, you're in this job, chief operating officer, you're 33, you never thought, you're like 10 years ahead of where you thought you would be in your career path. Don't be an idiot, do not do that. That is just ridiculous. 10 minutes later, I go to my mum and I go, Mum, I'm thinking about leaving. And she looks at me and she goes, of course you are. And I said, what do you mean, of course I am? And she said, well, what are you going to hang around like an ex-wife? At that point, my first decision was made, okay? And that was the first decision that I needed to make. My next decision was then, how do I leave this place? Like, I've been here 12 years. There's some rules when you work in financial services, particularly if you get pretty senior. The first rule is you never leave a job until you have the next job, right? Like, you leave a job to go into the next job. Like, leaving a job without something to go to is like crazy. You do not do that. It's stupid. The second thing is you always aim to walk out with a massive pile of cash, right? So you got to figure out how you get made redundant or cut some deal with them or do something that means you walk out with a big check in your hand, okay? Both of these things, my gut was telling me, were really not things that I wanted to do. I didn't want to stick around because I didn't feel like I could be passionate about what I was doing, and so I needed some time to think about what I wanted to do next. So my gut was telling me I should go. And I'd seen so many people try and kind of walk out with the check and just become really bitter, twisted people in that process, and I didn't want to be that person. So again, my second decision, and I'm going to share with you how I made this decision. It's very hard to keep a secret in a room this full, but if you could all get your phones out for a second, you'll have them in your pocket. You can go to Google. I'm sitting, and I swear to God this happened, okay? I'm not lying. This is genuinely 100% true. And it happened as I'm going to tell it. I'm sitting in, after the Sydney Christmas party, I'm a little bit hungover on a Saturday morning. I go to this cafe that I used to go to all the time when I lived in Sydney, and I think to myself, okay, I don't want to stick around. I think I've got to go. Could try and stay there, get this money, could try and go back into NAB, who now own that business, could stick around and find that other job. Maybe all that stuff's really bad and I just need a clean break. Maybe I just need to step away from this, right? And I literally went into Google and do this. I went in and I typed in clean break define, okay? So has someone done that and can read out what it says has someone got the, okay, can you read that out for us? Both lines.
A clean break. A complete separation from a situation or relationship.
Next line.
Dad decided it was best to make a clean break.
And that is how I made my decision, okay? So that was a pretty expensive decision to make on Google's advice, but that was actually how I made my second decision, okay? My third decision was, how did I get into this space? So I left, I thought I would go and work in private equity and make another ton of money, and I started talking to a whole bunch of people about that. I thought I would make myself useful, and I went and worked at Foundation for Young Australians. Does everyone know Foundation for Young Australians? I thought I would go and just give them a hand, right? I think they gave me more of a hand than I gave them, but I ended up there and I walked in and I realised there's this whole world of young social entrepreneurs that were just doing amazing things and building businesses that were having this amazing impact on the world. And this whole idea of making money and doing good was a completely foreign concept to me. It took me like a month to just wrap my head around it, and then I was completely blown away by it and decided that I had to do something in this space. I thought, do I set up a fund? Do I set up an advisory business? Do I start advising wealthy families about how they could invest in these businesses? I thought to myself, this is 3 years ago, I thought it's a bit early for that. Like, the market's not ready for where those types of businesses to come into it yet. And maybe I should just go back and figure out the private equity thing and come back to this market when it's bigger, because it's going to be bigger. I definitely know it will be much bigger. And I happened to then meet my chairperson, and who had just set up Impact Investing Australia, and our whole job as a non-profit organisation well, it wasn't our job then because we hadn't even started officially, was to help build that market. How do we help build that market in Australia? And so I said all of this to her, and she's very polite, and she would never say it in the way that I took it this way, was, Dan, you can go away, right? Go and make a heap of money in private equity and come back to this when all of the hard work is done, right? Or you can actually roll up your sleeves and come and help here and help build that market, right? And so that was my third decision. And I'll talk a little bit about that later in your own career decisions, but that was the third decision for me, was to go, okay, I'm going to step towards that as a problem and help out. But we're going to talk about impact investing today. Bina sort of touched on the definition, which is that it is a investment. So you're looking for a financial return. This is investment, not philanthropy. You're not giving the money away, right? This is investment. You're looking for a positive financial return. You're also looking for a positive social or environmental return. And both of those things need to be intentional and measurable. Okay, they're the key things, right? It's positive for both, intentional for both, and measurable, right? That's it. That sounds very good in theory. Where do you find these things? There tends to be three buckets of things that you can invest in that will produce both a financial and environmental or social return. The first area is what we call real assets. So like physical assets, okay? A clean, a wind farm, a solar farm, okay? A house. If you're a social housing provider and part of your mission as a social housing provider is to provide housing to people, you can't do that without a house. So you don't need to own that house, you need someone to own that house. And so an investor could potentially own that house, give you access to that house, and you can then use that to better the lives of the people that you are serving. Okay, so it's a whole range of physical assets that are what we call real assets that people could invest in that produce that impact. And there's some really cool ones that we don't really think about every day. Australian Chamber Orchestra have an instrument fund. Okay, they have a cultural mission, and you can actually invest in the instruments like violins and stuff that I don't know much about. Given that I'm from Pakenham High, that produce a cultural return for people. Okay, and so there's a whole bunch of financing that's going on there. The second area, what I would call program delivery. So hands up if you've heard of social impact bonds. Has anyone heard of a social impact bond? I'm not going to try and explain that to you right now. I'm happy to do it in question time if it's something you're interested in, because they're tricky. But you're basically investing in a social program that is trying to deliver a particular outcome, okay, for a particular group. So the first two in Australia were all about financing a program to return children in out-of-home care, foster care, back to a safe family environment, okay? And investors were financing that program, okay? The third area where we're going to spend more time today is on social enterprise. Impact businesses, right? I will use both of those terms interchangeably. Social enterprise tends to have a lot of arguments around the definition, okay? So I deliberately will use the term impact in businesses, which most people haven't caught up to arguing about yet, so we're kind of ahead of the curve there. But basically businesses that are not just operating businesses, and as an investor you would expect a financial return from investing in that business, but where they are able to generate impact. Okay, and I understand that some of the people in the room are interested in running those businesses or are already running those businesses. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to have two conversations, because I hear there's a kind of feedback thing that you get to tell Abina what you want me to talk about. So the two things that I'm planning to talk about, firstly, is if you are one of those entrepreneurs, if you have an impact business and you're thinking about how you finance that and where you go for that and who invests in that, we're going to talk about that. Okay. The second thing is, if you're someone who wants a career or is thinking about a job in the impact investing, dare I say, industry, then we're going to talk about that. How do you do that? Where would you do that? Who's doing stuff that's interesting in Australia that you can go and work with? Yeah? Okay. So, if anyone went through the 80s, basically you used to put this slide thing in and you would look through it, and before augmented reality this was like really cool stuff, right? The whole idea was that I'm going to talk about clarity. If you are, the first conversation we're going to have about being an entrepreneur or running an impact business is there are some things that you really need to have clarity on, okay? You should have clarity about these things just for yourself, But if you're going to go and talk to an impact investor, you better have clarity about these things, okay? So the first thing that you need to have absolute clarity on if you're running an impact business is what problem are you solving and for who are you solving that problem for? Because if you don't know that, if you can't answer that very, very quickly, you're in trouble, okay? And I would question whether you are running an impact business at all. Right? And I believe, well, many of you may have heard from Pamela Hardigan when she was out here, and you know, in her memory, she's an amazing woman who has since passed away, and I think we honour her memory. One of the things that she really pushed in this space was this concept of apprenticing the problem. Do you really understand the problem that you are trying to solve? Okay. So the things that I see that make me really sad about this space, or and it's not sad's probably the wrong word, but where I get frustrated is where people have solutions that are looking for problems, right? So if you want some one-liners, that's a one-liner, okay? That sucks, where people have fixed on what the solution is, and now they're just looking around for a problem that solution could solve, okay? Where people, and I'm stealing this off Jenny, fall in love with the solution instead of falling in love with the problem, right? Who don't get in there deep and really understand like how complex some of these issues are that we're dealing with, okay? And I know I had the opportunity to go and spend a week in Alice Springs. It was a few years ago now. I was one of those people, and I hope I'm not still, those armchair bandits that like kind of look at a problem that you see on TV, you know, like the 30-second grab, and you're already in your mind going, that can't be that hard, just, you know, do this or give them a job or, you know, whatever the case might be. I used to think about that like when people talked about Indigenous problems in Indigenous communities, right? And I used to think, oh, can't be, you know, surely it's this, just this and this, you just do that and then, you know, problem solved. I went to Alice Springs for a week and I had this opportunity to go on this course where we got to talk to people in the town camps, we got to talk to local leaders, we got to talk to local elders, and I can tell you after a week, the only thing that I walked away with was just a shocking sense for how little I knew about that problem. Right? That was it. That was the biggest insight for me, is like, I know nothing about this. I could not even begin to think about a solution for this because I'd have to spend another couple of years just understanding how complex some of the issues that these people are dealing with, right? So I cannot stress, and I probably already have stressed, that this is where you need to start, okay? And if you can't answer that, you're in trouble. Big sad face here, not because business models are sad, but because I don't get to talk about business models today. I think you've talked a lot about business models in MAP, and I'm sure there's other masterclasses and stuff. It's sad because I love business, so that's my thing. I love talking about business models. There's two things I'd like to stress about business models, particularly around impact businesses or social enterprise. The first thing is they are a business, okay? So you need to have, like, one thing that we often see is missing is a revenue stream. Like, what is your revenue stream? Do you have customers, like a product, a service? What are you selling, right? What is it that you're actually earning revenue from? Because if your idea revolves around getting grant money or getting donations or getting, you know, all those things, you may not be running a business. You may be running a charity, and there's nothing wrong with running a charity. Officially, I run a charity. Nothing wrong with running a charity. But you shouldn't pretend it's a business if it's a charity. Okay, so if you're going to run a business, if you're going to call yourself an impact business or a social enterprise, right, you need to have a revenue stream. Okay, what is that revenue stream? The other thing that I often come up against is people confusing two very different groups: your customers and your beneficiaries. Okay, beneficiaries are the who. They're the people you're solving the problem for. That doesn't make them your customer. Okay. I sit on the board of YGAP, runs Feast of Merit, the restaurant. Our beneficiaries are often people in developing countries we are ultimately like 3 degrees of separation later trying to help with either education, we're solving education problems, housing problems, access to healthcare problems, right? They are not our customers. They do not buy coffee at Feast of Merit in Swan Street, Richmond, right? So our customers are the people that go to Feast of Merit, the restaurant. We better look after those customers because they pay the bills that then enable us to get the money into the field to help those beneficiaries. They're two very different groups of people. Sometimes they might be the same, and that's awesome if they're the same. But in many cases, they are different, and people tend to gravitate because of their passion towards the beneficiary group and can sometimes very much forget about the customers. And I would just encourage you to make sure you are thinking about that. This is where I want to spend most of my time talking about. So the question for me is, how do you get impact from a business? Like, how do you actually generate impact in a business, in an enterprise? And you will not see this in the textbook because I made it up. It is the world according to Dan, okay? So take that with a grain of salt. But there's a little bit of thought that's gone behind this, right? And 2 years of kind of grinding it out, looking at different business models. In my view, there are 5 ways, and they are not mutually exclusive. Like, many enterprises that I see actually have many of these, or have 2 or 3 of these embedded in their model. But how you can produce impact often comes from one of these 5 sort of archetypes, right? You can have a business where the impact that you are generating is actually from the product or service that you sell. Okay. So, some people might say microfinance, microinsurance. The example I've used here, and I think Pollinate, have you guys heard from Pollinate before? Yep, okay. So Pollinate, solar lamps sold in the slums of India, okay? There's a whole bunch of, forget about the kind of environmental piece, there is a whole bunch of social health benefits, right? From people utilizing solar lamps that get their energy from solar rather than kerosene or other things that give off fumes, and all sorts of health issues with kids breathing that in their home. Okay, so you got to think the actual impact comes from that product, right? That is, sell more of that, more impact. Okay, so that's the first archetype. The second is where it is about the operating model of the business. Okay. Many of you will know Street, the cafe that Beck Scott runs here in Melbourne, a network of cafes. They employ young homeless people in Melbourne. Okay, they help train them in hospitality. There's a whole bunch of kind of life coaching, and also then help them get long-term employment in hospitality. Okay, coffees. I'm saying no social benefit, okay? I think you'd find it hard to argue the impact is coming from the product or service, right? The impact is coming from the way that they are operating that business. They, instead of just staffing it with 15-year-olds on minimum wage, they are finding young homeless people, and they are finding a way to use that business to actually solve a problem, right? Homelessness, education, training, right? Employment, okay, for young homeless people in Melbourne, right? The third one, which I've only recently changed, I've separated this out from the second one, okay? So this is a little bit of a work in progress. Value chain. Sometimes it's not actually in your operating model, like your business, but it's where you source things from that come into your business, or where you sell things to that, from your business, okay? I've used Etico here, who are a streetwear brand. I think you could argue that there's no social benefit in the t-shirts. I don't think they hire anyone particularly, that they would argue there is impact in Australia, but they source the manufacturers that they use, from memory, are in Bangladesh and Pakistan, and not only do they go above and beyond kind of fair trade approach, they give them more than that, but they also set money aside in those contracts for training, education, employment opportunity. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff that they embed in those, in the way that they pay their suppliers to improve the lives of those people that are working in those factories. So I think that's slightly different to number 2. 4, also Simon, I think you've heard from, Who Gives a Crap toilet paper. 50% of profits go to WaterAid, who then go and build toilets and do a whole bunch of other stuff around water and sanitation in developing countries, okay? They are sharing 50% of their profit. Right? And the 5th one, which I'm going to explain, is very different to the 4th one, is what I call the equity model, where not only are you getting, in this case, WaterAid doesn't own part of Who Gives a Crap, right? They just get access to 50% of the profits. In the case of YGAP, we own Feast of Merit as a restaurant, okay? Not only do we get the profits from Feast of Merit that we can then distribute to our, in our impact, but we could sell that restaurant tomorrow if we wanted. Like, you know, that is an asset that is growing in value. So not only do we have a revenue and income, but we also have an asset that we own, in this case all of, but you don't need to own all of it, that is owned that could increase in value and be sold. Okay. So you've got to be clear about what type of impact model you are running in your enterprise, your impact business. And it matters for a few reasons. Firstly, if I'm an impact investor, right, I'm going to care about how you're generating impact. And I'm going to care about this not just because I'm an impact investor and I care about the impact piece, but because I want to know about how you scale, okay? And scale, apart from being like the third most overused word behind innovation and collaboration, right, is a thing that I'm going to care about. I'm going to care about your business model because I'm going to care about how my investment helps you scale your business. I'm also going to want to know, does it also scale your impact? Okay, and how your impact model is set up will help me answer that question. Okay, no good your business goes from being a 100 grand turnover to $100 million turnover, but your impact goes from being this to staying at this, right? Like that is not a great impact model in my book. So they're going to want to know that. They're going to want to know what impact model you're actually running. Okay. The other thing that this helps answer really quickly is that first issue: what problem are you solving for who? Why gap? I tell you, we're not solving the problem here of healthcare in South Africa, okay? We're doing that through our impact arm. What are we solving here? We're solving a sustainability and funding issue for YGAP, okay? That's what Feast of Merit does. It actually gives money to YGAP, right? Yes, then YGAP then uses that money, right? But the problem we're actually solving is a sustainability one. So I want to find someone who cares about that, who cares about YGAP sustainability and developing sustainable income streams, because that's the investor that's going to fund Feast of Merit. The last thing you need to be really clear about is where are you at in this stage of development. I'm using this slide because I understand that Rowan's used this slide at MAP before. Like, this is kind of the model that you talk about from financing. There's various ones, some have 4 stages, some have 5, like, you know, whatever. The idea here is that you need to be clear about where you are, because different investors will be interested in you at different points. And if you're talking to investors that operate at different points, you are wasting your time. If you are, so the key thing for me, break even, okay, right? The key pieces for me are, there is a very different audience, like far left of this versus through here versus here. Like, okay, up here, if you've got scale and you want to talk to an institutional investor, you know, a fund manager, someone whose profession it is to invest in these types of businesses, that's a good conversation to have up here. If you're going to do that over here, you, as a social enterprise, you are wasting your time, right? Wasting your time. Down there, you want to talk traditionally to angels or triple Fs. Does everyone know what triple Fs are? Friends, family, and fools, okay? Because they're the only people that will invest in your business at that point in time, okay? The only added advantage that you have as an impact business is you potentially have a greater access to grant money. That's the other pool of money that you can think about in this stage here. Can be tricky how you access that. So if you're going to go for grant dollars, there's 3 ways you can do that. One is go for grant dollars that you could have got whether you're a social enterprise or not, right? There's heaps of government grants and all sorts of things that you can go for. If it is because you are an impact business or social enterprise, you've got 2 options. Either you are a non-profit yourself, okay, and I'm not advocating for profit or non-profit. I'm agnostic about that. But if you are, it makes it a lot easier to get money off foundations, because they typically can only grant to non-profits, and specifically often DGR1. So you have to have the tax status of being a deductible gift recipient. Not easy to get, but if you've got that, you know, grant money is much easier down that end. Okay. If you don't have that, if you are a for-profit business, the other way you can go about doing that is if you find a non-profit partner, okay, so go and find a non-profit organisation who cares about your impact and who is mission aligned to what you do, okay, and you potentially can partner with them so that you can access grants. I am involved with a startup in Sydney. We 3D print assistive devices, okay, for people with disabilities. Okay, so that's what we do. We are a for-profit business. We're like one of these new, the 2 founders that set this up as this one for-profit, for-purpose company. So there's all sorts of like complex stuff that means that we can't make too much money out of it. But basically it is a for-profit vehicle, okay? But what we're doing, like improving, invalidating the actual technology that sits behind this, is something that we want to share with many of the non-profit organisations. Like, we're open source with this, so we want to share it with them. And so we've actually partnered with a couple of disability service organisations because they're really interested in us giving them that technology, and we will go out looking for grants to fund that. And they can get the grants via those non-profit organisations because it's completely aligned to their own mission. Does that make sense? Yes, it's a little complex, that whole world, but it's very doable. So if you're going to talk to investors, impact investors, and we're going to park the institutions for a second, but most of the investors today sit in here, right? The biggest groups of investors in Australia are your high net wealth individuals, okay? So basically people with tons of money that want to do interesting things. And they exist, but they're actually really hard to find, okay? And the other group that's starting to emerge in this space, in the impact space, are foundations, okay? So if I look at some of the more high profile impact kind of venture capital style deals, so Higher Up is a good example, which is a disability services platform. Mass Pathways, Yumi is a food waste kind of secondary market for food, is a recent example. All of these businesses actually have, and most of them raised about $2.5 million in equity, have been foundations. So foundations are probably half of the investment that's gone in there, okay? Foundations much easier to find, like they're much more visible, okay? But they're not, very few of them are actually impact investing. Very few of them want to do that directly into a business. Most of them want to, have someone manage those decisions for them. But they are emerging as a group that are interested in that. So, how do you find these people? You've got two options. You either go and do the work all of yourself, right? Or you go and hire somebody to do that work for you. So a corporate advisor. So typically how this works in that space, well, not in this space, but like in normal financial markets, is you hire a corporate advisor, they go and put your deal together, they put an investment memorandum together, which is the document that people are going to make their decisions on about whether they invest in your business or not. And then that person helps you find a whole bunch of people that might be interested in reviewing that and investing in your business, okay? There is a bunch of boutiques like that specialising in impact businesses and social enterprises that are emerging that do that work, okay? And if you're going to, most of them, again, will not look at you until you're kind of about here, like you're at least at a point where you're close to break even, right? But they are emerging. There is a group of people that can do that work for you, okay? And they're worth speaking to at least. And I've put a list of them up here. Oh, the other group before I do is you may want to think about an accelerator or incubator, okay? For some of you, it's not that you're going to learn a lot through that process, but you may meet a whole bunch of people that you, are like you, or you may get money at the end, like the opportunity to pitch for money at the end of it, or it may just be from the opportunity to network with potential investors because they tend to congregate around these things. So, for that purpose, here's a list of all of those things. So, incubators and accelerators. There were 4 of them when I started in the impact space 2 years ago. There are now 14 that I know of, okay? Lots of them, including our very own compass and map here. Intermediaries, they're the groups of advisors that I've just talked about that can help you potentially raise capital. Don't go and talk to them until you're kind of past that point of validation, right? Because they don't want to, they get a lot of people coming to them with ideas. They will not take you on based on an idea. They'll want to see, have you got a customer? Have you got some revenue? Have you been able to prove this, right? Are you ready to take on capital to scale? And then when you get a little bit more advanced, like you're in a more sustainable spot, past the break-even point, there's 4 fund managers in Australia that specialise in social enterprise. Those are the 4 fund managers. There are other people that will lend you money, banks, all the rest of it, but there's 4 specialist fund managers. NAB are also, obviously, they're getting very involved in this space as well. We've worked quite closely with them over the last 2 years, and so they are also, from a banking perspective, developing that capability. We're going to move on to the career section. If you're thinking about this space, this is what impact investing kind of looks like today. It exists, but it's a little bit messy, Okay, so there's a bunch of these investors over there. There's a bunch of these, what I call investees, so people that are actually, whether they be social enterprises, whether they be non-profit organisations that are thinking about how they might use private investment. And all of these people are kind of trying to connect with each other directly, which is a little bit weird for financial markets. In financial markets, you have this whole layer of people called intermediaries, who are like the groups I've just described. They're investment banks, they're fund managers, they're all these people that help, right, sit in the middle of investors and the things that they are investing in. Okay, so I think that will happen with impact investing, and it's come a long way in the last 2 years. Okay, so we will release a report later this month around the number of products available in the market, and we have already seen that pretty much double in the last 12 months to about $1.2 billion of product available in Australia. And we think that's probably going to, well, based on what we can already see, that will probably double again. Okay. So it is growing pretty quickly. It's still relatively small in terms of the overall capital markets. To give you a sense of size, in just superannuation alone, Australians have over $2 trillion in super. So it's still relatively small, but it is growing very quickly. So when we get there, this is what it's going to look like. And if you want a career in this, I think one of the things you have to ask yourself is which part of this do you want a career in? Because they actually look quite different. On the investor side, you can go and join the superannuation funds in Australia are all thinking about this, right? Haven't nutted it out yet. There's a couple that are very active. Christian Super, very active. Hester, now active. First State, Sun Super, Australian Super, they're all thinking about this space. Okay, so you can go and work in a super fund and manage billions and billions and billions of dollars, investing in very large things that are probably going to be limited to things like healthcare assets, housing assets, clean energy, things that take a lot of money to invest in. You can go and work at a foundation, which is kind of neat because you can look at how the investment that you're doing also aligns with the granting that foundation is doing, like how their philanthropic activities also aligning with their investment activities. And that's a very cool emerging conversation about how you get those things to work together in a foundation. But foundations often, have, the biggest ones have the biggest one has a couple of $1 billion in Australia, but most of the more larger foundations have, $50 to $100 million that they are investing, and they're also thinking about how they become impact investors. You can think about joining a fund manager. There's actually quite a few. I listed a few that are specialists in social enterprise, but you could also think about how you join. There's a whole bunch of fund managers that are also thinking about how they develop impact funds. Family offices working for really wealthy people and investing their money. Okay. Likewise, in the middle, which most of you, and I'll come to this question, most of you will think about starting in this space. Okay, when you leave university. You go and join an investment bank, you go and join an accounting firm, you join a law firm, which I didn't list up here, a consulting firm, a wealth manager, something like that, who, big professional services firms, and most of them are also moving into this space. So you have EY building a capability in this space. You have, as an accounting firm, you have the investment banks that are actually really active in the US and Europe, but are now starting to get active here. So your Goldman Sachs, your JP Morgan, fund managers like BlackRock, etc. They're all starting to get active. There will be jobs in this space. Okay, and lastly, but not least not a word, but lastly but not least, is you can work on the investee side. Okay, so you could actually be in a social enterprise looking to raise capital. You could work in a non-profit organisation and figure out what the next big social impact bond is going to look like and how you can finance that for your organisation. And I've seen some people do some incredibly interesting work, including our friend Lachlan at Fred Hollows, who just did a development impact bond. First one in Australia, figuring out how to finance a hospital in Africa with private investment, and very, very cool. And that's probably more in that first group, which is the international NGOs, the INGOs. They are also thinking about how they finance their activities in developing countries. So, pathway. Most of you, the biggest question, so your hands up if you're if this is a career thing for you, if you're thinking about this as a career? So there's one person, okay. All right, so there's a few people. Okay, good. All right, I was going to say we can have a great conversation afterwards if you like. The biggest question that often people have is, should I start at an accounting firm? Do I need to go and do 3 years in an accounting firm or an investment bank or a law firm? Like, do I need to do that before I go and do the thing I really want to do? Yes, is this a question going through your minds at the moment? And I think the answer to that is, I don't know, right? I can tell you that's like, I did that. I went to JB Were, I worked there for 12 years. I ended up with a whole bunch of skills that I probably couldn't have acquired any other way. I learned about financial markets, I learned about how to engage with clients, I learned about professionalism and all sorts of stuff, right? But I don't think I could have done it just to learn that stuff, right? If that makes sense. Like, if you're going to go and make a decision to do that and spend 3 years of your life just to do something that you're meant to do, like, that's really sad. And that's going to be a hard 3 years, right? I did it, but that was never my decision framework. My decision framework, and I learned this over time, but looking back, was, can I be really interested in this, right? Like, either be passionate about it or completely intellectually engaged in this. Is this a problem that I could add value to? Like, I can help solve this problem, which kind of goes to the first piece anyway. And then the third one is, will I like the people that I'm going to be working with, right? Unless it was tick, 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 I didn't do the job. I made all my decisions based on those three factors. And so, yes, I ended up working in an investment bank and I ended up getting all of these skills through that process, but I don't think I could have worked there. I definitely couldn't have done 12 years. I don't think I could have done 3 years just for the sake of getting those skills, okay? So I don't know if that helps you, and sorry if I've made it harder for you, but that would be my advice to you, is to find out how you want to make decisions, and make your decision that way. This is a bit left of field, but your career decision is probably going to be very similar to the way that you choose ice cream, okay? Now, if you seriously think about that, when you go into the ice cream thing, some people stick with the one thing because they know it works and they're happy with that and they don't want to take any risks outside of that. Some people choose the thing that they've never done before because that could be interesting and I might like that, and so my guess is you'll make that decision in the same way that you choose ice cream. If you need something that is a little bit more intelligent decision-making framework than how you choose ice cream, this is one way that I have come across that, it's probably a well-worn path for many of you, but it's helped me make sense of decisions I've made. It hasn't always helped me make decisions, but if you think about your job, write a list of stuff that you really care about, right? And that you're really interested in. Write a list of stuff that you're really good at, and maybe get someone to validate that list, because not everyone's good at knowing actually, that list can be a little unrealistic at times. And then, write a list of stuff that are your needs from that job. It must be based in Melbourne, or it must be based in Australia. I must get paid $1 million a year. Why not, right? It's like, what are the things that are the basic kind of needs that you have out of that job? You are looking for the thing that sits in the middle, or the set of things that sit in the middle of that. So, career people, everyone else can stop listening. I'm just going to share a couple of things with you, because I often get this question, so I'm going to tell you the answer before I get the question, which is, when I was at JB Were, what were those things that really kind of helped me progress through my career? Like, what, if I had to look back, what advice would I give you to kind of progressing in a corporation, a big corporate, right? How do you kind of climb that ladder? And I didn't know it at the time. This is all in retrospect. So hopefully it sounds intelligent, but I only figured it out well after the event. The three things that I think I did really well, the first one is, and would be my advice to you, okay, is walk towards fires, right? And what I mean by that is, when you're in a big corporate, there's always a lot of big problems, okay? And there will be 9 people running the hell away from that problem, okay? Because they don't want to be seen as being the person that caused it, or be associated with it, or their name or brand attached to it, right? If you're that one person that's running towards that to try and figure out how to fix it, people that matter will notice that and will like you for that, okay? Because you'll get known as someone who gets in there and helps fix problems. And people like to be around with people that fix problems, okay? The second thing is, and this is very relevant to your early career years, do not waste your time in your whatever job you start with, spending all your time thinking about the next job that you want, okay? So when I started in the call centre, there were two groups in the call centre. There was half of us who just worried about being really, really good at what we did, okay? And then there were half of people that all they spent time was thinking about how they were much better than working in a call centre, and they should, and spending time thinking about the next job that they wanted, right? Those people never lasted. They left. And funnily enough, most of us that were in that first group actually got great jobs from that. And then the third one, which is a little bit tricky if you haven't worked in a corporate before, is this idea when you run into problems in a corporate or you have to solve a problem. Most people, think of it, the analogy would be you get to a river, right? And you have to cross that river. You've got two options. You build a boat, okay? We'll get you across the river. Boats are fantastic, cheap, fast, get you across the river. The problem with building a boat is once you get to the other side, your boat gets ditched and it doesn't help anyone that comes after you, okay? It helped you, but it doesn't actually help anyone else, right? The more courageous thing to do, and much harder and much more difficult, is to build a bridge, okay? It gets you across that river, but it also helps everyone that ever comes after you because they can walk straight across that bridge. And there's heaps of examples, and for those, I see some nodding heads, you've worked in big organisations before, there's heaps of examples of people that build boats because it's easy for them and they can get across the water and they don't really care about what happens after that, right? If you're someone that gets known for building bridges, you will absolutely, that will get noticed. You have to trust that gets noticed. So that would be my 3 tips. And if all of that doesn't work, ask Google. So that's me, and I'm happy to, if we've got time left, I'm happy to take some questions.